event. Can I get you to sit the panel members down?
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people as the traditional owners of this land on which we meet, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I would also like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are present. My name's Alicia. I'll be your MC for today, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this GEO Quayside event, Downscaling GEO, delivering impact at national and local levels. The emerging trend of satellite operators producing global-scale analysis-ready data, combined with global and regional GEO activities, presents an extraordinary opportunity to exploit EO data and drive progress against key national and international development agendas. However, there is a major risk that this data will be underutilised at national and local levels unless countries and communities have the capacity and the ability to implement systems and develop tailored products over which they feel a sense of ownership and control. Today's session is a forum for us to discuss the key policy and government challenges that currently hold back this downscaling and inhibit full adoption of EO-enabled products and services into national and local decision-making and program delivery. Our event will be structured around two panel sessions, first a national and then a local perspective, providing us all with an opportunity to learn from a diverse range of countries and organisations. To begin with, one leading question will be posed to each panel to kick off the discussion. These questions will allow each of our panel members to briefly identify the key issues and challenges that currently hold back downscaling and inhibit full adoption of EO-enabled products and services to deliver real impact. After this, we will take questions from the audience, but we will only be doing so via Slido, so please, if you don't already have the app, I encourage you to download it now so that you can participate in the discussion and direct questions towards the panel. The details down here at the bottom of the screen are the Wi-Fi for the convention centre. Please jump on now and download the app. If you already have it, this Slido code here, Downscaling GEO, will get you into our event. You can start asking questions immediately. So if you have any burning questions that you want to ask, get them in right now. And remember to vote up the questions that you particularly like so we can prioritise them in case we don't have time to get through all of them. I also encourage you to get on social media and hopefully talk about how this event is challenging you and inspiring you. And if you do so, please remember to use the GEO hashtag down the bottom of the screen, GeoWeek19. So, without further ado, let's begin our discussions. And to provide the opening address, I would like to introduce someone that many of you will already be familiar with, Dr. Brian Killo, who works for the NASA Langley Research Centre and is head of the CL Systems Engineering Office. Brian's been with NASA for 32 years and counting. Contrary to what this picture tells you, his favourite pastime is actually golf, although that's a very impressive fish. Brian's passionate about educating developing countries, and if he could leave our future generations with one legacy, it would be that satellite data is accessible and valuable to anyone. It's my great pleasure to welcome Dr. Brian Killo to open our event.
So how do you like that fish? Isn't that nice? 2 weeks ago, it was maybe 3 weeks ago, we were in Alaska for one of our CEOS meetings. And, you know, every once in a while in these global trips, I get to go have some fun. And we took a little salmon excursion. It was fantastic. Now, if I showed a picture of me playing golf, that would have been ultimately boring. So, well, thanks for having me here today. I want to give you some thoughts on what I think about downscaling GEO, what that means to me, and perhaps it'll be a bit provocative and get you thinking about what you want to discuss in the panel today. So, you know, my first thought when I was given the opportunity to give this address was, well, what does downscaling GEO mean to me? And my initial thought was that GEO is this high-level organization. It's made up of governments. It's made up of participating organizations. We know what's going to happen in the plenary the next 2 days. It's a massive assembly of people and very powerful individuals. Well, how do they get things down to the lowest level nationally and locally and have an impact? And that's not easy. So there's a lot of pieces in between to make that happen. So, you have the governments and the participating organizations, but we really need to connect them and make that impact at the lowest level. So I'm going to share with you an example, and the one that came to me, obviously, is one that I've been working on, and that's the African Regional Data Cube, and now moving into Digital Earth Africa. What has been done there, I think, is a good example of how we are downscaling GEO and the pieces of the puzzle that have come together to make the impact at the lowest level. And so we started back in May, about a year and a half ago it's been now, with the African Regional Data Cube, and a few organizations came together. One was the CEOS organization. We had the data, we had some of the technical know-how. Amazon gave us some credits to get going, and the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development and Data, which is one of the GEO participating organizations, came to us and said, could we pull all this together and make an impact in Africa? So we did it for 5 countries. Here's a picture of our kickoff, and a few of you in the room here are in that photo, but it was a really exciting time to get moving. That has now led to Digital Earth Africa, which I think there's a side session later today on that, but a lot has happened, and also some significant donor funding to kick that off. So let me talk about the pieces of this and how it all has come together for this impact. So again, at the very top, if you think of the GEO organization and the groups that it has, the governments and the participating organizations, GEO itself was aware of what was happening in the Secretariat. They were involved and knowledgeable about what we were doing in Africa. And GPSDD is one of those participating organizations. They came to CEOS as the data provider to pull it together, and we also use data cubes as our technical implementation method. The commercial sector got involved. Amazon and Esri are part of this as well. And as you see, if you go from top to bottom, this is where I think the example of downscaling GEO works. You have a lot of higher level organizations, and they connect all the way down to the bottom, and then we get to what I would say national level. So we have ministries we're engaged with, statistical agencies at these countries, and then finally local governments. And probably the lowest level, what I would call local, is what's happening in the research institutions. So we actually have a number of researchers that are involved in the African Regional Data Cube, and they're using the data. They're not associated with any of the governments. They just happen to be showing up at our training, and they're the lowest level researchers. And it's really interesting. When I say low level, they're just not connected to a big organization. But some of their problems are very unique. They have problems in agriculture and problems in water supply and really interesting things that we can help them solve, but they're not part of a statistical agency or a ministry for that matter, but still an important user. So in order to be successful and to make this work from top to bottom, I think there's a number of key elements that have to happen. And some of these I would call lessons learned that we found in our process for African Regional Data Cube. The first one is sustained capacity building and building trust. It takes time and resources, very important. We had a discussion just yesterday in Digital Earth Africa, one of our first discussions on capacity building. And we all know that it's just going to take time and effort to make it happen. One thing I've learned in Africa is that in order for them to really make progress and to accept what's happening, there has to be a trusting relationship built. And that doesn't happen immediately. We can go in and do a training session. We can leave that training session and go away, and nothing may ever happen because they did not necessarily build the proper trust with the people that delivered that, and they're not quite sure, well, can I contact them afterwards? Can I reach out to them for help? Is this something that's going to be there for me 6 months from now or a year from now? And, coming from my culture in the US, we tend to trust everybody. I mean, it's like we walk down the street and I just trust this person and that person with ease. But I've noticed in the international community, it's not that way. It takes time to build that relationship. So that's important. The coordinating organizations, none of this would have happened without GEO, without the global partnership, and without these organizations in the middle that connect the data and the technology to the users down below. We don't have the capacity to do that. So as CEOS organizations, I don't have the time, money, capacity to go out and to find out, well, who are the right government agencies? Who are the right people to connect with? And how do we set up a training session? That's where GPSTD comes in. That's where these other groups, and I put another example there, FAO, which is working for the Global Forest Observation Initiative. They're the ones doing the training, capacity building, and setting things up with the statistical agencies. The middle one, very passionate about free and open data and tools. All of this is really starting to make impact because of the fact that we have a lot of free and open data and we have a lot of tools now available. But it's not just that the data is out there and open. It has to be simplified. It has to be standardized in such a way that we can utilize it in the best way possible. That's something we're taking on within the CEOS organization. Several of the agencies there are involved in the Open Data Cube technology, and all that points in that direction. Ownership of data, products and services. We've noticed that at the local and national level, if we're going to downscale GEO and make an impact, those users need to feel as if they own the results and they understand the products and they develop them themselves. That's where I believe they're going to trust them and they're going to move forward and make decisions with them. If we just throw some answers to them and say, oh, you know what, if you go to this website, you can get the water results that you want, and why don't you just download that and put that in your paper and make a decision? I doubt they will use it. They need to understand it from the core level, and whatever that takes. Well, maybe they do accept that website out there because they know the person that developed it and they trust it. That's okay. But there's other users I found that, no, Brian, show me the code. I want to see what are you doing with this data. I want to understand it at the lowest level. And sometimes that's what's needed. So having that ownership, they feel as if it's their product and they understand it, they're likely to use it for decisions. And the bottom, this thing with traceability, I don't see Gilberto in the room, but it's something he's passionate about, the Geo Knowledge Hub. And you know, it took me a while to share his passion for that, but I don't say that in a negative way, I had to understand what it was he wanted. But I really believe it's an important thing. So the Knowledge Hub is this ability for traceability beginning to end. If I have a product at the end, and I want to show impact and I want to have people trust it, I have to be able to trace it from the data through, I have to have papers and I have to have published research. I have to be able to reproduce that. If I can't reproduce that, then it's just some magical solution that someone has come up with. I don't think that's good enough. And I truly believe that's what Gilberto's trying to say, in that a Knowledge Hub gives us examples of end-to-end traceability. And then finally, this is the last one. See, Trev? I'm there. These are the challenges ahead. None of this is going to be easy. So there's some key challenges that come to mind when I think of downscaling GEO and making impact. We have data all over the place in different systems. It's showing up in lots of different cloud frameworks. How do we make best use of that? How do we connect it? It's challenging. Capacity building and training, I've already mentioned that, and these trusting relationships. The other thing about capacity building is it must be sustained. We just can't go in and have a couple training sessions and then go away. We have to continue and continue to have that, build that relationship, make that impact, and whatever that takes. And that's probably going to take an investment from the user and from the governments and the local people as well. Language barriers, I'm noticing it already. You know, we try to do training sessions in Africa and Senegal and, you know, all in French. And there's having interpreters, and I'm trying to talk about a technical subject, and then the interpreters are trying to interpret that, and it's very difficult in many cases with this language barrier. Different national operational methods, people do things differently in all the governments. I just noticed not everything is consistent and the same. It's a challenge. Communication within the organizations. I was also amazed that a training session's going over here in this part of the country, another training session over here with a totally different organization. Neither one knew that these training sessions were going on simultaneously, and there was lots of overlap. So it's just they weren't talking to each other. So the governments and the national level and local level need to talk about this, because you don't want to be duplicating efforts. And then again, I come back to this: how do we sustain this funding? Many of these projects and initiatives we have starting, they're kicked off by initial aid funding. So millions of dollars are coming in through aid, but that doesn't last forever. So the countries, the national and local organizations have to develop a feeling that Earth observations are important to them and so valuable that they're going to find a way to continue to fund that internally. And that's difficult for a developing country. They don't necessarily have all the resources, but if we show them that Earth observations are valuable, I think they'll find a way. Thank you.
Before we get onto our panel, my boss has just put in a request. He'd like a selfie with Brian and the crowd. So everybody indulge him, please. Give a wave.
You ready? Hold on, let me just get Brian. Sorry, get back in, mate. I'm not very good at this. I'm clearly too old. That'll do. Thank you very much.
Okay, now let's kick on to our panels. I'd like to welcome our first panel, and as I am introducing all the speakers, I'll get you to come up to the stage. So first of all, I'll introduce our moderator, which is Trent Kershaw. Trent is the Program Director of Digital Earth Australia at Geoscience Australia here in Canberra. To help you all get to know Trent, I asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up, and he said he'd let me know when he figures it out. As you can see from the picture, Trent's favourite pastime is playing with his kids. And he also loves being part of a team of people working together to solve big problems, and says it's an absolute pleasure to wake up every morning knowing that work we're all doing together is making the world a better, more sustainable place. Welcome, Trent. Our first panellist is Andiswa Mills. Andiswa joined SANSA as the Managing Director of Earth Observation Directorate in October 2017. It's my favourite photo of the day. Andiswa has been an active participant of GEO since 2006, of which she's served GEO committees and implementation boards, including several national and international scientific groups. Andiswa has an incredible understanding and long-term passion for Earth observations and space applications, and her dedication has improved African participation in GEO by 60% and elevated the African agenda in the continent and internationally. Welcome, Andiswa. Our second panellist is Brent Williams. Brent is the Acting Executive Director of the Office of Compliance for the Murray-Darling Basin Authority here in Australia, which aims to achieve a healthy working basin for the benefit of the Australian community. As you can see from this picture, Brent's favourite pastime is sailing, but besides being incredibly passionate about sailing, he is also incredibly passionate about climate change, and his hope is to leave a legacy of a more sustainable future for generations to come. Welcome, Brent. Our third panellist is Yamina Juarez. Yamina is the advisor of the governing board of the National Institute of Statistics and Geography in Mexico. She has worked in virtual and augmented reality, as well as in 3D geometry processing. One of my favourite facts about Yamina is that as an undergraduate, she was the first female member ever of the robotics team of her university. And with this team, she participated in international competition Robo Rescue 2012, obtaining second place in robot manipulation. Welcome, Yamina. Our final panellist is Pascal Peduzzi. Pascal is the Jason Duff, sorry. Jason is a biologist and the geomatics research manager at Environment and Climate Change in Canada. His favourite pastime is organic farming, and as you can see from this beautiful photo, he's most passionate about being a dad. The thing he loves most about his role is working with scientists who are passionate about their work, because ultimately he wants to ensure that EO-derived information is more effectively used for conservation decisions that will benefit the future for generations to come. We'll get there eventually. Welcome to our panel. I will now pass over to Trent to facilitate.
All right. Testing. Okay, we're good. So I just want to say, I'm just having a look at Slido, and there are a few questions coming in. I want to really encourage you to get in there and ask some hard questions for the panelists. Whenever I go overseas, I always enjoy being told that you're Australian. We expect you to say something offensive, something bold. So I think the same applies. You're all in Australia. I encourage you all to ask something bold, and the panelists absolutely to say something bold. So let's get into it. So just to kick us off, we've already given the panelists advance notice for one question. So if you could each keep your answers to 3 to 5 minutes, that would be good. And we'll start with you, of course, Andiswa. How do we build trust in global data sets to ensure that data is being used on a local level to drive impact?
It's one of those big loaded questions, and I struggled actually to figure out which direction to answer this from in 3 minutes. Okay. so my third point would be, if we're able to build trust, we'll be able to get buy-in, and we'll also be able to get ownership. And I think this is, in a way, some of the things that Brian was alluding to in his presentation. So how do we get there? Well, we must be clear on the why. I mean, like, why this global data set? And I'm not talking on the imagery side alone, because I think for me that answer is very easy. Why Landsat instead of another data set? Limitation and all of those things become the thing. But from the derived products point of view, is why? Why was this data set developed to start with? Was I in the room when this discussion on why this data set is important for it to be derived? Was I there when we were talking about its level of accuracy and the quality and the level of scale that it's going to be mapped at or developed at? Because when we start talking about the global data sets being used at the local level, we need to understand that the problems at the local level are quite different from if you're looking at what you're wanting to understand on a global scale. So the scales and resolutions become one of those issues. So the why, and how we define the why, we start talking about the co-design and the co-creation approaches having to come into play. But then you now have this data set, and you might have missed out on the why and developed it as a group of scientists because you had an interest and you wanted to know what land cover looked like globally. And so you came up with a global data set of Landsat. But now how do you make land cover data set. How do you make sure now that this is being used? So who do you promote it to becomes very important, and who do you partner with also becomes important, because picking up the right partners is relevant. And most of the time I find that we shy on picking up the right partners. It's okay for someone to raise their hand and say, I want to be a partner, for you to say, no, I don't want you as my partner, because you're not relevant. You're not going to give me what I need to make sure that this data set is actually used at a national level. So picking the relevant partners at a national level, whether from a user perspective or from those who are mandated, because one of the issues that comes up with global data set is the authoritative nature of the global data set. We have mandated institutions in our countries. If a data set comes in, I'll use land cover again. We have an institution that's mandated with land cover. If a global data set for land cover is published, and our national institution has not been involved in that process and isn't given it its endorsement, it's very difficult for that data set to be used in the country, because there's no ministry that's going to use it and make any decision based on it, because it's not the authoritative data set. So the partnerships that we formulate are quite important. In GEO specifically, we need to also look at how do we communicate as the GEO community, and how do we partner as the GEO community so that we do not duplicate effort. So I'll use land cover again. We had a land cover data set done in the US, and we also had a land cover data set done by China. And we were faced as the communities on the ground who are connected to GEO with having to answer the question, which one should I use as a user? Now, we don't want to take sides, right, because we sit in GEO with the same partners and everything, but a conversation up front as partners to say, we're building this data set and we're going to make it a global data set. How do we then make sure that we do not duplicate efforts, and also we do not confuse our users, because our users are not as learned as we are as an Earth observations community. So I think I will summarize that with simple saying, let's partner. Let's partner in defining the why. Let's partner in how we build these data sets, and let's partner how we promote and make sure they are used on the ground.
Brent, over to you.
Thanks, Trent. I work for what I would categorise as an end-user agency in Australia, and I would say that there are three aspects that others have already mentioned, but I'll bring my perspective to it, to making this work for us. One is accessibility, and I don't just mean, you know, interface with data sets and computers, I mean understanding. This is a really big thing. How do you make this accessible to the end users so that the decision makers can understand what the hell you're going on about? I'm using that blunt language, Trent, you asked us to.
You can do better.
Global satellite remote sensing data sets. It rolls off the tongue, but what does that mean and how do you access it? And if I'm going to recommend to my chief executive or my minister or my cabinet spend many millions of dollars on this thing, I have to understand what the hell you're talking about. That's one thing. Trust. Brian spoke about trust, and others will today too. How do I know that what you're presenting and what I'm picking up is true and accurate? I work in a highly contestable natural resource management sphere in Australia, water management. We're in the middle of a massive drought again. Every drop is precious. Every industry, every stakeholder, every end user is squabbling over water. So if I'm presenting data that's derived, or information, or products, or decisions that are derived from this big thing that you all are bringing to me, how do I trust it? I've had stand-up arguments with farmers and landholders when we present modelling data, mapping data to them, they say, I don't believe you. That doesn't represent reality to me. The real challenge with this stuff is to make it understandable and trust and enable people to trust the information so they can use it. And the last point I want to make, keeping within my 3 minutes, is end user applicability. Where's the value add? What are you providing to me that is going to be worth my while for investing enormous time and resources into understanding this capability, both at a government, institutional, and from my perspective, a land owner or industry point of view? Why should I spend money on this when I can spend money on a new tractor or new staff or new systems for my work?
Thank you, Brent. Jimena.
Thank you. So I'm going to reply with another question. You ask how do we build trust in global data sets, but I think that the question we would like to answer really is why do we want to build trust in a global data set? And I think it took me a while to understand this trust issue with data sets, but I think the main issue is that it's not that we have better data sets, it's that we find that they complement each other. I work in the Institute of Data Sets, basically, in Mexico, so why would I turn to the other side and look for some other data source? Basically, I think that if you combine both the data sources, you may find that you are building on top of both. You are adding to the result. Alicia exposed me as an engineer in the geospatial world, so it took me a while to step aside from that process mindset into a more of a validating in situ person. I took that as comparing two data sources will always make you trust both better, not only the global data sets. You can always trust yours if it matches with someone else's results. So comparing is something important in the academic world, actually. So for me, the introductory chat was basically the answer to this. So you have to go to the lowest level to start trusting the data sets. You need to understand it in a local level. And one of the strengths that I find in INEGI is that we have an infrastructure at a national level. So our experts are very familiar with the regional problems. So if they can validate that, they can also build up the trust in a global and in our own data sets. Okay.
Thank you, Jimena. Go, Jess.
Okay. Well, I have, I think, similar themes. I'll try and say it a little bit differently and with a different accent, maybe. So I work in the science side of Environment Canada and the wildlife side of the organization. So we do conservation science, try to develop different products to conserve wildlife. And I sort of see ourselves as brokers. As it was mentioned in the introduction, I'm trained as a biologist. I work with geographers and remote sensors, so I try and translate, information from, physicists and engineers who take that sort of approach to remote sensing, and I think that oftentimes that information misses the target in terms of what biologists require. And it was mentioned earlier about trust in terms of products. If we give a biologist a product, and they go out into the field and they find that it's not very accurate, then they're not going to use it anymore. So we try and broker that. So in my role, we use a variety of different products, both global data sets. I mean, we're big on ARD, and we're grateful for organizations that make those available. We use gridded climate data in our cube so that we can do climate normalizations of trends. But a lot of the data that we use in terms of conservation is focused on land cover, ecosystem mapping, and those types of global products are just not at the resolution. I mean, they're getting better in terms of the last probably 5 years being able to process Landsat data at global scales. But what we're really missing is the thematic depth or the thematic resolution. Sometimes these global data sets are 16 or 17 classes, and usually a lot of them aren't found in Canada, right? So a land cover classification with mangroves in it doesn't really help us, So we take a lot of those analysis-ready data sets that are either raw data produced to a certain process to a certain level, and then work with the biologists to try and figure out how we can satisfy their requirements. So I think that my suggestion in terms of people that are producing these global data sets, I would suggest don't oversell them. I know this is perhaps not that popular in a room full of remote sensors, but I think that the last 40 years has been looking for the Holy Grail, and we still haven't found it. I'm not sure it's out there. So I think that we just need to sort of recognize the limitations, manage the expectations about what you can provide at a global scale. I think, and I mean, even we get it in a domestic sense as well with our national mapping agencies. I think that you need to think about targeting the product. This is what I mean about the difference between a remote sensing approach, sort of an engineering approach to land cover classification versus a more biologically or end user driven one, is that not really considering what the target is or what the usefulness of it is. I think that's really important, rather than just pressing buttons, trying to maximize the amount of clusters or whatever that you can get out of it. I think there's definitely a role for some of these value-added products. For example, we use the global surface water one from the European Commission. It works great for masking. If we want to do land cover classification, we want to mask out water. It works. It works well for us. Similarly, some of the land cover products that are available internationally can be. We recommend them for some of our colleagues who are doing landscape analysis, fragmentation, landscape scenario modeling, stuff like that. I mean, it works fine. They're products that are, they're done synoptically, they're done in a standardized manner, and they have their place. So I think it's a mix, and but I think that really targeting it, managing expectations, being upfront about the accuracy, within the classifications or the products is really important so that you don't oversell it. Because I think overselling it and having people find out after the fact that they've used it, it's not accurate, it wasn't up to what they thought, is where we can lose trust from end users.
Great. Thank you, Jason. So thank you very much to everyone who has been getting on Slido. There are quite a number of questions. I encourage you all to get into the app if you're not already. The hashtag is up on the screen there, Downscaling GEO. And vote up the questions that you like. I see some really pertinent ones, one particularly from George who asks, can we see Trevor's selfie with Brian? So,
For a price, George.
yeah, I'm sure it'll be all over Twitter soon. There's a pretty epic yeah, hopefully there's a pretty epic photo bomb in there as well, so I do what I can. And we've got a question here from Alex, who is asking what role crowdsourcing potentially of satellite calibration and validation data might play in making these global data sets more relevant to national and local scales. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Ground truth data.
I mean, one of the things with the partnerships is exactly to look at means on how you provide the validation and how you get the data sets validated. So partnering with the crowdsourcing community, which is still working out the mechanisms for the inclusion of data sets from crowdsourcing, I would say it's definitely one way to ease the costs for validation, and also to make sure that we get there quicker. So I think it will be definitely useful because most of the time, the global data sets are not validated globally. So there's places that you say, okay, here we had a good validation, but in other places it's not so good.
Great. Anyone else want to chip in there? Or?
Yeah, I think it's very valuable, particularly with the end user trust. We've used citizen science or observation on the ground from landholders to help track the movement of water through landscapes in our work, and it really helps validate the data or the presentation of the data for those users.
Great. Cool. I really am taken by the strength of the message about people in this. We have all of this data. We know we have the data. We know we want more data, but what is it without the people who are engaging with it, looking to use it? Absolutely. So I think that's really important. I wonder if any of you, Brian brought up the Geo Knowledge Hub concept. In terms of, does anyone have any opinions on how we might bridge the gap between a hub like a Geo Knowledge Hub and actual people on the ground? Through to the keeper. Oh, ouch. Cool. Okay, fine.
I'll have a go, Trent. It's about the applicability. So, I mean, I heard Brian say that phrase, I heard you say it, I'm thinking, what does that mean? And as an end user, it's about the presentation of the data, the product, and how I can use it to add value to what I experience or do. Geo Knowledge Hub, fantastic. What does it mean for me?
Great, thank you. We've got I think that is a question we should all probably think about a little bit. A question from Bob. What area are we currently failing the most in impacting the globe with Earth observing data? What is our biggest failure?
Is it thematic area or?
Could be, yeah. Thank you for the bold and brave questions.
So, Bob, I hope I'm answering from the right angle that you meant the question from. I think our biggest failing is still on the promotion. I think we're still doing a lot more talking to ourselves and amongst ourselves and with each other. And this is why I was a bit reluctant even on the GeoKnowledge Hub, that a part of my brain thinks the GeoKnowledge Hub would be perfect for the remote sensing community and the Earth observations community. But for our users, it's a different space altogether. So when you're saying people, I go right to the person who needs the information, who has to make the decision on where do I build the next settlement. So there's this gap. And I think the session we were in before on the geo value, where we're still trying to find a way of how do we communicate the value of Earth observations, how do we make our policymakers understand the value of Earth observation beyond just the monetary terms, which most of the time is what they're interested in. When I give you so much to build a satellite, how much money am I going to get back? How do we respond to that question in a way that it raises uptake? I think it's more on that engagement and to actually get the end users, if I can put that term in, to understand this value. We need to do a bit more engagement and talking to those who are not here. You know, because again, Geo, we're talking to ourselves again, even here.
I'm not sure specifically. I think that there are a number of disciplines that have a lot of corporate memory. So from my perspective, it's wildlife. You know, the wildlife stuff. There's a tremendous. They've been doing things the same way for 50 years, and to get them to change the way of thinking is quite different, right? And the biologists that we work with, I call them the rubber boots biologists, right? They like to be in their rubber boots with their binos and tilly hats and watching birds, and to try and get them to think that they can, get some information from 800 kilometers up in the sky. It's a very challenging thing, right? And it comes back to this trust thing. So, you have to be careful because you're trying to get them to sort of shift their thinking to, using new streams of data. And I think one false move, so to speak, or one sort of bad product, and you kind of set yourself back. And I find we sort of do that. We go a couple steps forward, a couple steps back, at least in our domain. And I think that there are other ones, other types of disciplines like that, where they've just been doing things the same way for the, water, I think is traditionally, similar. I think it's getting better. In countries such as Canada, Australia, we're big countries. You can't do it with rubber boots and marshes. So we need to work on this. And so I think that those sorts of traditional type disciplines are the ones where we have some challenges.
Great, thank you very much. So given the very much the focus on the local context and how we bring that up. What role, and I think I might throw this one to you, Jimena, what role do you think GEO might be able to play in unlocking the value of all of this in situ data that we know exists?
So currently working in the implementation of the Open Data Cube in Mexico, and this started in a conversation that happened within the GEO community. It started at the highest level of this pyramid that Brian showed us. But now, for example, here with me is a PhD student that is merging the data sets of Landsat with our census data, for example, in order to solve a very local problem, which is how is our urban development happening within time. We only have our own data every 10 years. So we want to complement it with Earth observations. And we're actually having very, very nice results with it. And apart from that, we don't have additional data. So it's the only thing we have. So.
Right. Anyone else want to chip in? Yes.
It's end user integration. So I don't know what I don't know. I know in a large scale, if you like, conceptually, the applicability of remote sensing to my work. I know about some aspects of it that help us do my work. In a previous career life, I was involved in fire management in Northern Australia, and we built remote sensing platforms from the ground up. And when the funding ran out, we managed to source new funding because the end users were involved in the building of the technology that was applicable to them. So that wasn't accidental. That was a deliberate program of reaching out to end users and showing them what we thought could be done and asking them what they needed, and then responding and building products that help them do their job.
Great. Okay. So, sorry, tech fail here. I should have connected to the Wi-Fi. My bad. So there's a great question here, and I think it's very much focused on the African context. So interested to hear, and this way, yes. So, are there other high-quality data sets that Digital Earth Africa and in the African context more broadly could be linked with, and what further insights could we get if we pull together that public data with perhaps some of the other data as well?
So my assumption with that will be, for now with Digital Earth Africa, we've got Landsat, thanks to USGS. So Sentinel will definitely be a good add-on to that. As there's a number of applications in the continent that have started to bubble around Sentinel data, and the access to Sentinel is still a bit of a challenge at the moment. So if Digital Earth Africa can include those data sets in, that will definitely be great. There is also a consideration of how we bring in high-resolution data sets, but these will definitely not be continental, of course, because that will depend on the licensing and the ownership by the countries. So there's definitely some thoughts that we could put in terms of additional data sets that could go into the data cube for Africa.
So in terms of linking that big Digital Earth Africa picture and looking at how we might relate it to the more local context, and particularly the specific interests of, say, different countries. How, for example, might Digital Earth Africa relate to South Africa's specific interests?
Well, it's engagement, I guess. It starts there, and I'll have to applaud the Digital Earth Africa team. They've done very well with this because if you look at the way that the governance structure has been put together, is to ensuring that there's a participation not only at a continental level in terms of the institutions, but also at the regional level and also at the national level. Now, if you've got the regional institutions and the national institutions participating, it actually means you've got the double take in there, because the regional institutions have national memberships in them. But then to have institutions at a national level participating in their own right adds another thing, because the mandates are slightly separate in those. So the drive from the bottom then comes from the bottom up in terms of the countries and the regional institutions inform Digital Earth Africa in terms of how to make those connections. So the governance structure as it currently stands and how it's been envisaged definitely is building that engagement and that gap. And so what we will definitely be next conversations, especially in the technical advisory group, is how do the local, call them national data cubes or regional data cubes, work with the Digital Earth, Digital Earth Africa at a continental level.
Okay, great. 5. Okay, cool. So we are coming to the end of our time, but I would like to throw a question to all of you, especially given that our next panel is very much an industry-focused panel. What role does industry play in you achieving your objectives as government organizations?
Okay, so I'll start since I have the microphone.
Sounds fair.
Well, the mandate for the South African National Space Agency is to ensure uptake and usage of space technologies and space data by government and all of government, right, is to improve the decision making. It's not possible for an agency, especially of our size, to respond to all the 3 spheres of government requirements, from national to local government. In this regard, we then look at industry, because products and services at a local level can only come from industry. We can support industry in determining what are the requirements from government. We can enable industry by negotiating access to data, by putting infrastructure platforms that help industry to build the products and services. But to actually deliver a product and a service to anyone within the government sector, we look at industry to do that. And so we're actually hoping that in the next couple of years for South Africa, we're going to see a big growth on industry, partly thanks to Digital Earth Africa, but also thanks to our efforts as well. So far, we're so limited in terms of the products and services that we're offering to the country coming out of Earth observations, and most of the time we end up being then project-based, which doesn't help our cause at all, so it starts and stops. But if industry can really come on board and start developing services, not just products, but services, that would be very helpful. And that's sort of like the relations and the engagements we're looking for.
I think in INEGI, as an NSO and mapping agency, I've seen the industry work both as a data supplier and also as a user. So, for example, we've worked with Twitter data sets, or with sales, with banking data sets. And as I mentioned before, that complement our previous data sets, and just we have a second data source that fulfills more trust in the initial data sets, as in the role of a data supplier, but also we see them as users, and very picky users, because they put a lot of stake when they take a decision. And if we can back our data, then this collaboration, when they are not shy on feedback, helps us as well.
Great. Jason?
Well, from my perspective, I think that, like I said, we're in a science organization. We like to do research. We have very competent researchers doing very good things, trying to match user requirements with products and data sources. Where we really have a hard time in Canada, I would say, in our agency, and I think in some of the other government agencies in Canada, is going from the research and development to an operational platform, so that these products can get to the people that need them on a regular basis. And yeah, more and more, I think I'm looking to industry to be able to help us out with that. I think that, I mean, if you can, some of the things that I see industry do, I figure if they can do that well, then maybe they can help us, bridge that gap from the research R&D into an operational. I think that will really help in terms of one of the earlier questions about the limitations or what's going wrong with the uptake of EO information. Well, from my point of view, and in Canada, I think that's one of the, we do these things in sort of fits and starts, but to have something that's operationally running, I think would really bridge that gap. I would like, I think that's obviously on the upstream end of as you mentioned, the satellite suppliers, is very important, but for us in sort of the midstream, that's where I see the real role of industry.
As I mentioned before, my business is help managing a contestable natural resource, water, in a drought-stricken country at the moment. This is more of an aspirational comment. I think there is an opportunity. We use Earth observations to track water's presence or absence in the landscape. So, is water in a dam that a farmer has? Are they accessing that water legally or illegally? That's a question. Where's the water going in the landscape for environmental outcomes? And at the moment, because water is such a contested commodity or natural resource, a lot of the farming industry groups are struggling with social licence. People don't trust them. There's been some well-documented cases recently in Australia of water theft and systemic failure of government systems to manage access to water, and there's an opportunity, I think, for industry groups to use Earth observation and remote sensing to help rebuild their social licence, because in most compliance situations, 95% of the people are doing the right thing. People just don't believe that they are anymore, and I think that would be an aspirational goal that we could try and achieve.
Great. Thank you very much. I am really interested to hear the strength of the argument here that the importance of social licence, the importance of understanding that very local context drives us forward in terms of being able to use data on a national scale, and I think realistically the same applies globally. So I think that's a really strong message that we can all take away from this session. Please join me in thanking our panel.
And please thank Trent for moderating our first panel.
Cheers, bro.
So I'd like to take a short moment to have a break, everyone, have a breath for our panel changeover before we start to talk about local level impact, industry level impact. And I want to really consider where impact might come from and what it might look like. Because it doesn't always come from the industries or the agencies that we expect it to. And if we try and anticipate all the applications and the potential uses of EO data, we're simply limiting the possibilities for impact. Last year, Geoscience Australia had the privilege of hosting a local Australian multimedia artist and associate professor, Grayson Cook. Grayson, like many of us, found the EO data being provided by our Digital Earth Australia program beautiful and inspiring, so much so that he used it to tell a story. I'm going to read a foreword from Grayson before we play Open Air, which was the name of the project that he produced. These words are Grayson's. The phrase I like to use to describe this project is creative Earth imaging. It combines aerial macro photography with the work of painter Emma Walker with time-lapse satellite imagery of Australia to produce a complex picture of the forces that shape the Earth. I want to extend my deep thanks to Geoscience Australia and the Digital Earth Australia team for making this project possible, because for me, this project has been an absolute revelation. Before I started working with the satellite data from DEA, I sensed that the imagery could be quite beautiful, but I wasn't quite prepared for just how incredible it would feel to watch the life of this continent unfold before my eyes. Watching enormous salt lakes fill and empty, watching the Channel Country funnel tropical rains down to the Red Centre, watching vast storms from the Southern Ocean drift up the Eyre Peninsula. Through the eyes of the satellite, we feel the breadth of the continent. We feel both its great age and its great fragility. Humankind is now a planetary force, and we will need the knowledges, tools and languages of both the arts and the sciences if we are to truly understand our impact on the planet and the rest of the processes we have set in play. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy this brief excerpt from Open Air. Can we get some volume? We can't get some volume, but it looks good.
If you could sing along with it.
I'm not singing. I'm absolutely not singing. Enjoy the visuals. And we're back to the start. Complete tech failure. Would you like me to advance the slides? Take two.
I'm pretty sure that is not what Grace is saying.
looks like we're not going to get any volume or advancement. So hope you enjoyed that very brief intermission. If you'd like to watch the video and find out more about Grayson's work, there are some postcards at the back of the room on the table. Feel free to take one. They have a link to Grayson's website where you can watch this excerpt from Open Air yourselves in your own time. So let's crack on now. I'd like to welcome our second panel to the stage. And if the panellists and the moderator could come up as I introduce them, that would be wonderful, thank you. Our second industry panel will be moderated by Dr. Trevor Dew. Here we go. Trevor is the branch head of the National Earth and Marine Observations branch at Geoscience Australia here in Canberra. Trevor tells me he wanted to be a pilot when he grew up until he realised that he couldn't actually see very well. Trevor is most passionate about open data and making sure that everything he works on is helping real people deal with real problems. He loves that working in Earth observation lets you be part of a global community like GEO and appreciates a sense of collaboration, common purpose and momentum that comes from that. When I asked Trevor what legacy he would like to leave for future generations, he said he wants to make sure that his two beautiful kids on the screen inherit a world that is safe, clean and sustainable. Welcome, Trevor. Our first panellist is Pauline Akeo. Pauline is a projects manager for Esri Eastern Africa, where she oversees the development and implementation of the professional service portfolio in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania and Ethiopia. Pauline's greatest joy in her profession is the opportunity to support government and non-profits in implementing spatial solutions to address national and regional challenges. The legacy that Pauline would like to leave is improved map literacy in her region, as she believes preservation of society and biodiversity begins with people being aware of their surrounding and everything that relates to it. Welcome, Pauline. Our second panellist is Dan Wicks. Dan is the head of Earth Observation at Satellite Applications Catapult. I asked Dan what he wanted to be when he grew up, and he told me a mountain guide. So it's no wonder that his favourite pastime is cycling, and he's passionate about the great outdoors. It also doesn't surprise me that the thing he loves most about working in the industry is the ability to leverage technology for the greater good and have a real impact on global issues so that he can help secure a clean, healthy and productive environment for future generations. Welcome, Dan. Our third panellist is Nathan Eaton. Nathan is the Executive Director of NGIS Australia and the new dedicated EO company, EO Data Science. Nathan's favourite pastime is an easy one. He's 3 children, with a close second being brewing beer. He is most passionate about delivering EO solutions that drive and deliver impact. Nathan loves his role and the opportunities to achieve and impact the variety of industries that he gets to work with, and he hopes to leave a legacy of using data to make better decisions to support sustainable development. Welcome, Nathan. Our final panellist is Jeff Sawyer. Jeff has been the Secretary-General of the European Association of Remote Sensing Companies since 2011 and has driven the development of the association into the widely known and well-regarded organisation it is today. I'm sure many of you will already know Jeff, who is very well known to many in the space and Earth observation sectors and brings his deep wealth of experience and knowledge to support the ambitions of the geoinformation industry that ERSC represents. Welcome, Jeff, and welcome to our panellists. Thank you, Trevor.
Thank you. Is this working? You can all hear that okay? Beautiful. So thank you again, everyone, for coming along today and for the time from our panellists. We're going to just jump straight into it again with, a question that we gave the panellists a heads up and a warning was coming, so hopefully they've all got excellent answers, I have no doubt. However, feel free again, that same Slido channel we were pointing at before, please continue to pile on with more questions and we'll try to get through as many of them as we can in the session. So, and we'll just go straight to you, Pauline, if that's all right. The question that we posed was, what is it that you need from global and national data to make a difference, to make informed decisions and to drive impact?
Thank you. Is it working? Okay. First, I'd like to thank the previous panel for just pointing out all the points we wanted to share during this time. But just in addition to what you had said and the introduction that was given to this session, One of the considerations I was hoping was that we'd rethink who the end user is. I think for a very long time, and also what was said by the previous panel, a lot of focus has been on enabling researchers, enabling the government to actually be able to make use of Earth observation data. But looking at the context of the growing interest by the citizens to make use of this data, empowering the local people to actually make informed decisions from this data, it's very important that we rethink who the end user is. So we need to put in a bit of emphasis in terms of the capacity development aspect to just go beyond the support that's being given at government or regional level, and to also look for a way to also incorporate other user communities who may actually benefit from this data. So here we are looking at businesses, we are looking at developer communities and so on, to just try to reel them in to take advantage of the data that's already available out there and being used at national level. The other consideration would be for most of these organizations to consider industry as a complementer of what is already being done. So being part of the global tapestry of ESRI and operating at the local level. So for me, it's for Eastern Africa. We have a very good network relationship that we have formed with government institutions, with education institutions, and with different user communities within our region. So this can be leveraged by the different global Earth observation organizations out there. We already have this relationship and we understand what are the requirements for that specific end user I'm talking about. So it's very important to also to look for a way for us to collaborate. Some of the concerns that had been brought out were duplication, as well as a lack of ownership to some point. So we can just leverage, or we can look for a way to collaborate, and just looking at what Digital Earth Africa is doing and what ESRI has with Africa Geoportal, that's just one of the ways that collaboration can be done, but there's still so many other ways of collaboration. Thank you.
Okay, so I thought I'd turn the question around a little bit and think about what is actually stopping us from maximizing impact at the moment, and present some observations around that. So it's a lot of discussion around the fact that there's a very confused marketplace, and if we think about data alone, there are data coming from lots of different places, and even in some cases the same data being duplicated in different ways, and that is confusing. For me, the opportunity in this market space is, and the way in which we can enable innovation and therefore greater usage globally is really opening up the value chains to new entrants. And my challenge here is that where there is such a confused marketplace that established remote sensing industry are going out and generating their own data rather than using data sets that exist already, how can we expect these new entrants to come along and be able to play in this space to encourage that innovation and encourage that growth? And that brings us back to this issue of trust that's been raised several times within this session. And for me, there's a few ways in which I would define that. It's not about necessarily having a single source of truth, but having a way for a user to differentiate and understand the data they're working with, and that's having a measure of quality attached to any data product. It's working towards interoperable and standardized data outputs, and it's also trying to help the user to understand the limitations of working with any given data set, i.e. choosing this one because it's more suited to a certain application over another one. I think in terms of the data providers, there's certainly a piece to think about in terms of, where do the efforts start and stop for that data provider in terms of the levels of products being provided. And in my view, there's a big challenge in our space around the kind of business model that supports the value chains that we want to see created. And there are sort of two extremes that we tend to work to. On the one hand, we identify these narrow sort of use cases where we see, oh, Earth observation can help us here, it can tell us something useful, and we know that that something useful is what the user wants. But in terms of the economics of standing that up, it falls down and never comes into fruition. And then at the other ends of the scale, you see this over-promising of the kind of capability of remote sensing and the desire to sort of build something that can do everything for everyone. And that is a challenge because you also end up with something that isn't really very well understood, i.e. how does this thing benefit me and why should I invest into it? I think we need to think about reframing that sort of opportunity a little bit. So are there ways of looking at more discrete markets that allow us to demonstrate, but still demonstrate the scale at which Earth observation can operate? So an example that I might use is land management. Landowners, land managers, if you look at farmers in the agriculture sector, if you look at water companies, if you look at the insurance sector, if you look at construction, all working in that space, there are a set of common requirements that exist across those groups. Are there ways in which we can start to produce more focused data outputs in sort of market clusters? And I guess the final point that I want to make is that this confusion that I described up front propagates right through the value chain to the end user or the customer indeed. And I think we need to be cognizant of the fact that if you look towards certain customer segments, I'm going to take the example of engineering. They work with and have very well established standards for data that they embed into products and services. In our communities, we can work as much as we want on defining standards around data, but at the end of the day, if we're not working with and contributing to the development of those existing standards already embedded in industries, the data sets are never going to be adopted. So that kind of cross-working, as has already been raised by the panel, is imperative, and it's a two-way collaborative thing. Thanks.
So our mission is actually to partner with organisations to operationalise Earth observations. So as part of that work, we get to spend a lot of time with end users. So we actually hear the voice of the user pretty frequently. And one of the things that we find increasingly is that users will actually leverage what's available. So the whole conversation of accuracy versus availability, really trust is almost implied increasingly. They trust the data that's being made available to them. So the challenge is then, well, how do we increase accuracy into that conversation? How do we make sure that from an Earth observation perspective, the data that's being used has the best science available, it's the best model to be using, and it's put in the hands of the people the right way that they want to use it. So with the whole trust conversation, I think that's the real opportunity within the EO and GEO community, is making sure we're getting that accuracy and the science into the data, into the hands of the people that need to use it most effectively. And then moving forward, one thing that we see increasingly as well is that users and solutions, particularly in the next 2 to 3 years, will want to use multiple sources of content. There's so many different varieties of content available with different capabilities. It doesn't really make sense to lock yourself into one particular type of content that will fit all of your different applications within EO. And we've got this amazing opportunity at the moment where we have great contributions from ESA, from NASA, from Geoscience Australia that are investing heavily in open data and these large, really highly accurate data sets. And then we've got tremendous advancements in the satellite community. We've got organisations such as Capella that's releasing hourly SAR updates to provide INSAR monitoring for applications such as tailing dam failure. We've got the guys at Planet with their nanosats and CubeSats doing twice daily revisits with great capabilities. So the opportunity is then, well, how do we combine all of those into the same workflow? And we've also got the opportunity, and I know that the Geoscience Australia team is doing wonderful things with cloud computing that just wasn't possible 5 years ago. So how do we take advantage of all the different content to actually provide the capabilities that organisations need? And one of my favourite phrases at the moment is aces in places. So the ability to use large-scale regional data sets such as Sentinel-2 to provide overall regional insights, and where you find an issue, there's actually change that's been detected that you need to know more about, actually drop in with the tip and queue scenario, and then engage your commercial suppliers. I think it's that end-to-end supply chain and making the most of all of these different data products that will provide us these opportunities to deliver the right solutions.
At Earth, we represent the downstream sector. Everybody, I think, on the panel has used the word partnerships, and it's a word that I use all the time to describe the relationships that we try to set up. Two-way relationship was used. And in this sector, government is key. I represent the industry, but the industry cannot go very far without the government. Because in our recent survey, we find 65% of the revenues come from governments. I need to explain that further because 50% of that represents the government as a user. 15%, 1/5, represents R&D sponsorship and to support research goals. But if you think about it, even some of those research goals are in support of government as a customer. So more than 50% of the market is government as a customer for Earth observation services, geospatial services built upon satellite data. And that really defines it, that we have to have a partnership between government and the industry. And I really appreciated Andiswa's statements there about the industry and the industry as supplier, because the industry can supply services, sustainable and operational services. And that really is our goal to help promote that. So I build on a lot of other things that have been said in earlier panels, but I think for the moment I can leave it there. So partnership between government and industry is the key. I think there's an awful lot of technology out there. I think we've come an awful long way in the sector. We've moved from research to business, but there's still a lot of transition to make. And maybe we can develop some of those themes as we go along in the panel.
So I'm conscious that throughout all of in fact, both panels today, there's been a lot of talk of partnership and of trust. I guess one of the questions I'd like to pose to the panel here, and it's a paraphrasing of something that's on the Slido, but in terms of success and an ecosystem, if you like, of government and industry-led services is going to require on trusted data and will inherently involve industry as well as government. I guess a question to you, what role do you see GEO should play in that? What role, we're here at a GEO Key Site event and we have an opportunity to give a message back to the GEO plenary. What role would you like to see GEO and the intergovernmental partnership here play to really support industry going forward?
I take this one first. I think GEO is in a great place to enable the uptake of the services. It's not a delivery organisation, so it's not about delivering services, but it is about informing about best practices, informing about the trust, providing trust in those services, and simply enabling the engagement between supplier and buyer, customer, user in the government domain, as I've already stated. We've just had another side event about the value in Earth observation, where we're doing work in case studies and exposing the value. And I think this is something that should be brought more into the GEO umbrella and promoting the value that's there. The value to the stakeholders. Storytelling, evidence-based storytelling is the phrase I'm using at the moment.
Similar to Jeffrey, the GEO, the value within the collaboration and the network is immense. And just having been to a number of different sessions throughout this week already, what struck me was the level of overlap between a lot of different initiatives. Where the opportunity is to use that collaboration. So we use the most of all of the initiatives going on. A lot of them are really focused on providing great fundamental data and capability. Some of them focused on platform, some of them focused on last mile applications. But the ability to use the GEO network to actually combine these initiatives to make something more meaningful and engage with the end users, that's where I see a really strong role for GEO in particular. And as Jeffrey mentioned, GEO is not meant to be that delivery arm, and that's the opportunity for collaboration to go right through this supply chain from data acquisition, correction, platform, all the way through to those last mile applications. But the GEO network is pretty much unrivaled within the Earth observation community. So that whole potential for collaboration is where I think that GEO can play the biggest role.
I mean, nothing significant to add other than saying I think this session already exemplifies and builds on the point that you made, where the issues faced from a government perspective and the issues faced from an industry perspective are largely a lot the same, and let's not try and solve those in isolation. Let's work together.
Yeah. Pauline, would you like to add anything?
They could still further assist in terms of accessibility through definitely having additional data sets being served and being made accessible to different kinds of users, as well as just helping the governments that you are working with, the national level organizations, to build capacity to be able to still further access to some of this data, because you'll find that at national level, at their particular level, they can be able to drill down in terms of having some of these data sets relevant at national up to local level. So just supporting them in terms of enhancing accessibility through capacity development, as well as building frameworks that would allow for this data to be made available. Yeah.
So I'm going to avoid eye contact with Alicia as I go off script for a moment here and ask a question that was actually posted via Twitter. Thank you to Brian's post. We've attracted a whole bunch of other questions and take a very different angle to this. So we've talked, mostly what we've talked about today has been about satellite data. So a question from Steve Ramage, who unfortunately can't be here, has chosen to sledge us via Twitter and throw a question into the mix, which is, in situ data, both the collection and the management is often a completely different community working from the bottom up. What's the plan or approach to include and integrate that in situ community and in situ data?
I'm not sure about the community angle, but in terms of the data, my comment before around the future being multi-content absolutely extends to in situ data. And the example, let's take utilities, where it's not feasible to actually run drones over utility networks every day to actually provide data in terms of vegetation encroachment. But what is possible is to use Sentinel-2 at a regional scale to identify where there might be issues, drop down into high-resolution data where required, but then actually operationalize drone operators to go through and take more accurate data on the network exactly where it is required so they can inform their maintenance schedules. I think that full supply chain of data doesn't just stop with satellite data. It includes aerial photography, it includes LiDAR, it includes UAVs. It's the full data supply chain, but having it all available in the same solution so they get the best of all of those different types of data products.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Again, I agree. Community, I think, is the wrong word, because in terms of in situ data, it's so very varied. I think there is a strong role for GEO in trying to encourage the opening up of in situ data sets and maximizing their value to different players and cross sectors even. A lot of data is proprietary, a lot of in situ data is proprietary and can't be made open or is made open in under very specific license conditions. So awareness of that, encouragement of best practices to enable good licensing conditions and good discoverability, all these keywords. So I think GEO can certainly play a role there, but it's it is a very complex domain.
Great. Yeah, please.
Maybe just a small point to add to that is also developing the understanding of how benefit could be derived by using these data sets together. So case studies, stories around where this has worked well.
Yeah, superb. Did you want to add anything, Pauline, or are you happy to? Okay, we'll push on to the next question. So I've got a question here off Slido, and I'll just, before I ask it, encourage everyone, I know we're getting late in the session, but please, if you've got more questions, or there are questions on Slido now that you really want to vote up, please get involved. Otherwise, I'm going to just start making questions up as we go. It'll get very, very boring for everyone. But there's a question here from Thomas Furman asking, should government agencies only provide users with large-scale ARD and let industry perform all of the downscaling? So it's a live question. I guess we've talked previously about the line, if you like, between what governments provide as data versus what industry takes down. What are your thoughts about where that line should be and how it should perhaps move through time?
So that is maybe I'll start with that. So it's a super interesting question. And my view on that is the line needs to be at a point where you're enabling new value chains to be developed as much as possible without disrupting industry too much. And unfortunately, I think what that means is that certain parts of the more traditional remote sensing industry may be disrupted, but what that will do is open up the opportunity for new entrants into those value chains, which I think is really important for the scale of growth that we're looking for. And I think that could be taking a step beyond ARD, and I talked a little bit before about this idea of clusters of requirements in certain markets, and are there sort of standardized higher level products that could be built on top of ARD to kind of enable growth in those specific sectors? I think so.
I'm not sure exactly where the line should be, but my comment would basically be, I don't think it's a hard line. It's not a stop from government and then start from industry. It's, as we talked about, it's collaboration between. So it's actually having that continuation between the two and partnership that I think will ultimately reap the best rewards. I would be keen on your thoughts, Trevor, in particular from a Geoscience Australia perspective.
Mate, as the moderator, I don't think I'm allowed to contribute thoughts to this.
Trent said I could ask questions.
Look, I actually would back what Dan said. I think the challenge for a government agency who's trying to unlock new industry is how do we do that without completely destroying old business models, but recognising some of those business models are built off, that they are there because the data is difficult for others to get to. And if we unlock the data, they're going to lose some of that. That's a challenge for us. I think government's role is to be transparent and as clear about where we're going as we can be, and when that changes, forewarn the market as early as we can. But I'm happy to be told I'm wrong. I see Jeff's got the mic. Let's see what he has to say.
No, I would generally agree with that, Trevor. I think, I mean, it's a soft line, but it should be fairly stable, and transparency certainly, but it shouldn't be moving all the time. There was a sort of implication in the question about agencies and delivering ARD data, but I mean, so with so much more commercial data becoming available, I mean, the sort of implication there that it's all in one side. Partnership, dialogue, and some stability, because if companies are going to invest in ARD or any other form of data, they need to know that that market's not going to be taken away later. For public satellites, data sources, perhaps that would be more general, if it probably makes sense for the agencies to be providing ARD. It's probably more efficient to be done that way than it is to be multiplying that processing across many different sites. And of course, industry would support that. Efficiency would be good.
So I might actually offer a tweak on that and throw it to you, Pauline, if I can, which is, if you look at how you mentioned before the relationship between Esri and Digital Earth Africa. Now, in fact, in that model, the Digital Earth Africa capability is going well beyond just analysis-ready data. Is that something that helps you in terms of having products that are, rather than looking at surface reflectance, we're looking at water or land cover or land use? Where does Esri sit in that sort of space?
So one of the challenges that we've had within our region is accessibility to data, which, again, we're very grateful for what came in with the Africa Regional Data Cube and what's going further ahead with Digital Earth Africa. So one of the key things we appreciate for most of our customers or the people who make use of this data is a lot of the heavy lifting has already been done. And in terms of trying to access the data, managing the data, as well as doing some of the processing of some of the analysis. So where we come in as Esri is providing the tools, as well as enabling some of the workflows that would allow our users or the end users to make use of this data. So with us, with the Africa Geo portal, what we are having is some applications within that just ideally will channel what has already been served or provided through Digital Earth Africa, and just adding all these other layers that are relevant to some of our users, and just now from there, the people can now derive insights from the different layers with the imagery providing useful insights and analysis from it providing useful insights, which now just basically enrich some of the information that they're getting and just take up the decision-making level, decision-making aspect to another level, yeah.
So let me take the conversation in a slightly different direction now, and I want to use a question. I'm actually going to generalise a question we had from Carl around potentially the role of NGOs. So Carl's question was specific about Digital Earth Africa, but I guess I would ask this, and I know there are some groups up in the panel now who've done some work in terms of international development and engaging with communities. We've talked about the role of government, we've talked about the role of industry, but how do you see those capability linking in with NGOs and other communities that perhaps governments sometimes don't work with directly, and what the role of industry might be in that place?
I can say for us, already we have well-established relationships with these organizations, and for some of them, trying to see how they could make use of some of this data has been quite a challenge, because they don't have the capacity, they don't have the resources and so on to be able to do this. So again, just appreciating some of the efforts that have already been made. Now for us, our role as industry is to just provide that in-depth support to some of these organizations to be able to make use of this data. And again, our platform, ideally what it does is it just simplifies the whole aspect of trying to work with the data, and it allows people to integrate some of this information from different sources and so on. So I can say for us, just having this particular platform that makes it easier to work with the data, because for most people, they get a bit anxious when they're seeing the data coming in, maybe in formats that they're not familiar with, and so on. So I think for us, it's quite good that we have the ability through Esri, as well as through the local organizations we are partnering with. That's local businesses who are just technical partners to us. We're just enabling the usage of this data to other beneficiaries, such as NGOs, academia, and so on.
So building and deploying a technology solution anywhere in the world is no easy thing. It's not just a technical problem that you've got to solve. There's so much around that, and it's so important to work with everybody and anybody who is working in, engaged in, and able to contribute value to a challenge space that you're working within, whether it's contributing kind of technically, contributing to understanding local ecosystems, owning relationships, and NGOs are just another part of that needs to be brought into the conversation, because what we absolutely have to avoid is duplication of efforts and this problem of project fatigue that often hits sort of developing nations.
Yeah, I completely agree with Dan. And so we've seen quite a few examples of the project fatigue as well. And public, private, NGO, at the end of the day, they're all trying to have an impact within Earth observations. So they're all trying to get to the same outcome in many circumstances. It's all about collaborating together along that path to make sure that you're doing it effectively. And certainly from Brian's presentation earlier on today, a lot of the key messages that Brian had in terms of capacity development really resonated with me in terms of, from an international capability perspective, providing ownership back to the countries. We did a project in the Pacific Islands to build capacity to provide LiDAR data, to provide inundation modelling the last few years. And we got the opportunity to actually run the same capacity building project essentially 4 different times. So for Tonga, Samoa, Vanuatu and PNG. And the mindset that we came in with it was to make sure that it was fit for purpose. We'd been through, we'd done the planning missions, we'd had a look at previous projects and how they'd worked. And many of the projects would go through and deliver the same software each time saying, you must use this, this is industry best practice. There's no other option. And there was such a gap between the software that they were already using that it made the new technology pretty hard to use. So by the end of that 4-country mission, we deployed 4 separate capacity building programs, I think 15 separate technologies depending on what they actually required, all about trying to get towards the end result. And by the end of it, I think we got it right. And the key aspect of it was, I think as Brian pointed out, ownership. So not just delivering inundation models, but actually delivering the data in a way that the countries can perform the inundation modelling themselves. The key aspect to that is science doesn't sit still, particularly within climate change. So providing capacity building that just delivers an output, that doesn't provide resilience and long-term sustainability. You don't hear too many times sustainability not linked through with long-term, and that is an absolute key component of it. So it really resonated all the things you said before, Brian, along that path.
Yeah, I really like that answer. I wanted just to pick up on the efficiency because this really is perhaps the key, and also in terms of the relationship between industry and government. And my initial answer to this was simply to remind ourselves that nothing comes free. It may be free at the point of delivery, but it's paid for somewhere. And understanding where it's paid for and paid for in the most effective way, whether that's private resources or public resources, is the driver. I'm currently going through a book called The Value of Everything by Mariana Mazzucato, which is a very, very interesting read and comes up with a quite different perspective on the contribution that the public sector make into the economy, and is quite a refreshing viewpoint, I find. So if anyone's interested, look that one up, The Value of Everything by Mariana Mazzucato. Bit of publicity.
I was going to say that's a fabulous way to end. And I'm looking at my timekeeper. We've got 5 minutes? 4 more and blame the tech fail. All right, 4 more minutes and we can blame the tech fail. In which case, I'm going to ask each panellist to pretend you're writing the slide I get to put up at plenary. What's the one? You get 1 dot point. 1 dot point. What is it? What is the message you want 105 member countries, more than that in terms of participating organisations and new associate members to take home from today? What's the one key message? And I'll write my notes as you go. No? And Jeff, you have the microphone, so unfortunately you get the least time to prepare.
Unfortunate, yeah. I've just been preparing my one slide from the previous session.
You could just write mine for me first.
So I've already got one captioning summary as well, which is about evidence-based storytelling. Well, I guess based on the discussion it has to be around partnerships between government and industry. It has to be about efficiency, and find the right trustful relationship between the 2 sectors.
That was well done, without notice as well. For me, end users are king. End users will actually drive the impact. So make sure that you're including them in the conversation and understanding their needs. And the future will be multi-content. So prepare in how to use different sensors, different content to provide you the outcome that you need.
The further we go down the line, the less things there are to say, right?
You just go +1, Dan.
Yeah. What they said. Yeah, I think just to reiterate the role that industry has to play in that and the value that they bring, but industry cannot act alone without government, and government cannot act alone without industry. So it has to be a collaboration.
What they had all said, and just to emphasize that it's very important to have that relationship, and also for definitely the reliance of government and other organizations to rely on industry, because we all have the same interests or the same goal in the end, just to allow now for the industry to have enough room to just complement what is already being done. Yeah.
That is fabulous. Could I please ask you all to join with me in thanking our panellists for their time and their insight today? And I think I would love a selfie with you, mate. Yeah, come on over. Yeah, you can't get enough of this, right? No one else has got anything to do. I'm sure they'll love to just hang around.
Would all our panellists like to get up?
All right, everyone, let's go that way. I'll smile on this one instead of horrible. Thanks, Ken.
Nicely done.
Over to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask Trevor to stay up on stage, and please no more selfies. Just provide us with your closing remarks.
How long have I got? Just 2 minutes?
You have 10 minutes.
I do not need 10 minutes. Because people have heard me speak enough. Look, I guess I want to say a couple of things to close up. When we worked with all of the partners for this side event, Mexico, South Africa, UK, everyone who really helped us pull together the concept at the very heart of this, and in talking to all of our panellists who we've had today, we really wanted to come up with a way to look at one of the big challenges that I think everyone has seen, which is there is this incredible investment in global EO data that, if we're really honest, we don't think is yet realising its potential. We think there is still a gap in that, and I think we've seen some great answers from all and sundry on the sorts of things that we collectively and GEO as a community can really do to drive things forward. By good fortune or design, my panellists at the end there have given most of the key points, so I'm not going to repeat too many of them, but I do actually just want to highlight a couple of the common messages that I heard through the first and the second panel. One of those is that standing point of user focus. On a need in everything we're doing and considering about how do we actually, and to paraphrase Brent, look at the accessibility of data that we know, as Andis was said, what is it we are creating data sets for, who are they for, and what do we want to do with it? And that is something that is irrespective of government or industry. All of us need to keep that in mind, and all of us have a role to play in it. I think I heard a number of times that trust is a key parameter, and to paraphrase some of the things that were said, trust tends to be hard-earned and easily lost. And I was particularly struck, and have to find a way to work in the term rubber boot biologists into our final slide, but this sense that we need to recognise that people who live and breathe on the ground looking at their specific issue and challenge in detail will not instinctively and automatically trust data that comes from hundreds of kilometres up into space. That is a real challenge for us to focus on, and we heard a couple of times that one of the keys in that is not overselling what we do, but also looking at being clear on the usability, which data sets are relevant for which product, what are the uncertainties around those products, where can you and can't you trust products. And that again was another common challenge in both our industry and our government space. The other part, everyone said it, it doesn't come as a surprise, but this will be a very clear message in our presentation back to plenary, which is that government can't and shouldn't try to reach everyone. It's not the role of government to reach every farm, every industry, every community, every person. It is our job from government, and I speak from government, to enable that. And enabling that means partners like industry who can actually be the bridge from our reliable, trusted capability to the end users. And that will require partnership. It will require a partnership across the line, if you like, between government and industry, and recognition that that can't be a line. It actually needs to be a zone of collaboration where we are working with each other to drive these things forward, to actually understand each other's challenges. And I'll conclude with the comment that those challenges are common. Many of the challenges, I think, Nathan, you might have said that, or Dan actually, that the challenges that the government panel saw are very much the same challenges that industry is seeing, and ones that we should be looking to address together. And the final thing I just want to say is reflect on all of this is for GEO, right? We're doing this as a GEO key side event. We're trying to understand how we as a part of that GEO community can help GEO to help us. And I really recognise two things. One, there's a pretty clear message that GEO needs to maintain its effort and grow its effort on unlocking more data. It's done a fabulous job with many of the open data policies that it's championed, but there's clearly space for us to do more within GEO. And while it is a very, very challenging area, unlocking of in situ data in order to address some of that trust, I think is an area that GEO wants to do better at, and that we as a community need to help GEO do better at. And finally, just recognising that we all collectively see GEO as this incredible community and an opportunity to draw people together, to draw communities together, to connect communities, different communities, industry with users, government with industry, and government with users. That's something that we all really value out of GEO. It's something that we need to continue to support and applaud GEO for doing, and it's something that will be a key part of our message at conclusion. So thank you all so much for your time. I'd also like you to just very quickly please thank Alicia and Yamina, who have done a huge amount of work in the background to actually make this event work today, and Alicia for chairing it throughout the day today. Thank you very much, both of you. We'll leave it there.
Thank you, Trevor. And I've got a few more thank yous, because an event like this couldn't happen without the support of many, many people, and I'd particularly like to acknowledge the organisations and the agencies and the departments that are listed up here on the screen. Thank you for your support in organising this event and supporting it with representation as well on the panels, and I hope everybody here has enjoyed that. I'd also like to finally thank you, the audience, and those participating remotely. Thank you for your questions. I hope you found today's discussions both challenging and inspiring, and I sincerely hope you enjoy the remainder of GEO Week and the rest of your time here in our nation's capital. Thank you again for joining us.